and welcome to Meanwhile in the West, my weekly series where I read through the letters to the editor in my local newspaper, The West Australian, and I criticise the stupid people who write in stupid things. So first up this week, Judge Him on Ground, 18th of June 2014. All this time, I thought you had to be an exceptional sportsman to be accepted into the AFL Hall of Fame. Apparently, you also must be a model citizen incapable of making mistakes. I agree with George Parry. The case of Cousins, that is 16th of June. Cut Benny some slack and judge him on his professional life, not his personal life. T. Hudson Manning. So, for those of you who are unfamiliar with this, Ben Cousins was a rather famous Australian rules football player, and they want to induct him into the AFL Hall of Fame. The thing is, he had a rather turbulent personal life, which involved a fair bit of illegal drug taking, allegedly. Which led to all sorts of dramas on and off the field. And so some people have suggested that maybe he isn't the best role model to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. And what this letter writer and many have done is basically to attack a straw man of that. No one's saying that people have to be model citizens who are incapable of making mistakes in order to get into the Hall of Fame. What they're saying is that Mr. Cousins was well outside the mainstream in terms of his personal foibles, was much more noted than many other sports people, and as a result, maybe doesn't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame due to his personal life. Now, that's a reasonable debate to be had, and I'm not entirely sure which side I come down on. I think most people acknowledge that, you probably can do things terrible enough in your personal life that have nothing to do with your sport, but do things that are so terrible that you don't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. If you turned out to be a mass-murdering child rapist, most people would probably say that no matter how good you were at playing a sport, you probably shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. Similarly with musicians and their Hall of Fame. If it turns out that you're some kind of serial rapist or something, most people would say maybe we shouldn't put them in the Hall of Fame, no matter how good their music was. And so really the debate is about where the line should be drawn. I personally think that he should be in there, but you should be careful about the way he's presented. Perhaps they should do a fair and balanced position on him about covering not just his professional career but also the personal issues, or they should make sure that it is very clear that it is just the professional, his professional life that he's being included for. But yeah, this kind of straw manning that somehow you have to be perfect in order to get into the Hall of Fame is not what people who are criticising it is all about. People are criticising it because he did have a dodgy private life, and that, like it or not, people who go into the Hall of Fame are seen as role models. They're held up as role models and people want to emulate them, and it does send the message that this kind of behaviour is not that bad or should be somehow overlooked due to somebody's sort of sporting prowess, which is probably not the kind of message we want to send in our society. Next letter. I cannot believe this. 18th of June 2014. Lawyers representing families of drowned and injured boat people who are suing the government after their vessel crashed on rocks at Christmas Island in December 2010 have got to be joking. The argument is that a rescue team should have been waiting to help. I just hope we don't have to foot the bill for this challenge. Chris Green, Jindalee. Okay, so if you're not aware of the story, what it is that a bunch of asylum seekers who'd come to Christmas Island by boat in 2010 were, due to inclement weather at the time, their boat foundered on rocks just nearby Christmas Island, and a bunch of people drowned and were injured. And a lot of the locals on the island struggled to rescue them. In the wake of that, it was found that it was, to some extent it's been alleged or possibly found, that the government's search and rescue boats and service, etc., was not up to the task that it was supposed to be. And so apparently there is a court case that is apparently based on this idea that the government had failed in their duty of care. Now, first thing I'd like to say that if you believe in the rule of law and justice, then having this heard in court is exactly what you should be supporting. Whether you think that there's a case or not, a court is exactly the place for that to be decided. And if, as is suggested, that it's completely without merit, I'm sure the court will have no trouble finding that. So essentially what you're saying is you don't have faith in the court to hear the case and decide reasonably. And let's be clear here, there is this idea that that our duty of care, the government's duty of care in particular, shouldn't extend to people who are somehow not citizens or somehow breaking the law. And the question I want to ask is that, well, there's two things here. Firstly, do these people who are asylum seekers, they're not boat people, they're not illegal immigrants, they are asylum seekers. At the point where they arrived at Christmas Island, they were perfectly within keeping with international law and Australian law. They'd broken no laws at all. They were doing something that was entirely their moral and legal right, which was to seek asylum in Australia. Does the mere fact that they were asylum seekers coming by boat mean that they deserve for some of them to drown to death and others to be injured? And any reasonable person would say no. So then the next question is, given that, does the government have some culpability here? Was the government in some way responsible for what happened? Now, many people would say no, of course not. You decide to come to Australia, you essentially take on the risks that that sea journey would have. But, and here's where the crucial part that the court will be considering, is if the government had search and rescue operations, or people and boats, etc., on the island, if they could foresee that people were coming, and that the government's own actions were to prepare some kind of search and rescue type vessels and staff, then on some level the government has already taken on some responsibility. Now, you might say that a government can reasonably foresee that this would happen and can prepare for it, but on the other hand not be responsible for it. And I think that's something that has to be argued in court, personally. And I don't know which way it would go, but I think that I'm not entirely sure. I think the crux of the argument is that the government had foreseen this, had put resources into providing this previously, and then had either withdrawn the resources or had somehow failed to upkeep them. And the idea there, I think the argument is that the government had basically reneged on what was a reasonable start. So the government had initially put search and rescue resources there, and then had failed to fund them or allowed them to become unserviceable, purely because they didn't. I think the argument is purely because they didn't care about asylum seekers potentially dying, and that the argument is that is negligent. So again, I'm not sure what the merits of the case are. I'm not a lawyer, but I understand that it is it is somewhat more complicated and somewhat more reasonable than the straw man that people are arguing against in this paper. Next letter. A sight for sore ears, 19th of June 2014. A simple solution to the offence of using a handheld mobile phone while driving is to confiscate the phone and the SIM card at the scene with, say, a $200 penalty. Word will travel fast, and if you continue to do the wrong thing, you deserve all you get. I'm sure the sight of the first shipping container to be filled with mobile phones and sunk well out at sea will make a lasting impression. E. Freeman Smith, Northam. Okay, so this is a similar suggestion we've had previously. This one's got the nice imagery of all the confiscated phones, say, being put in a shipping container and sunk at sea, which I quite like. The basic point is that it would fail as a method to induce people to not use a phone. We know that simply making something illegal and making people aware that what they're doing is wrong and is not to be tolerated has the biggest deterrent effect, over and above anything else. So we tell people that speeding is wrong, we have minor levels of enforcement of it, and as a result most people speed by very small amounts. Those people who don't obey the law as a matter of course, so those people who do routinely talk on the mobile phone, etc., are unlikely to be particularly bothered by having their phone confiscated and their SIM card. Phones these days, you can buy a brand new phone which will do most of what you want for about $20. SIM cards are essentially free. You get another one of those for about $20. And a $200 penalty often for that group of people may well go unpaid. We know that unpaid fines is a major problem in enforcement. And so the idea that simply fining people and confiscating their goods will have a significant deterrent effect is simplistic. As you say, it's a simple solution, and we all know that to every problem there is a simple solution that is invariably wrong. Yeah, and impounding phones, people aren't attached to their phones these days. They're not what they were 15 years ago, where a phone was a significant purchase. I mean, people are, but people upgrade so regularly that they're not that attached. It's an inconvenience if you lose your phone or whatever, but most people are able to replace it. And so the confiscation really misses the point for most people. And yeah, the people you really want to target aren't going to be particularly bothered by it because they won't pay the fine anyway and they'll just get a new phone. E-Cigs and a cash cow, 20th of June 2014. It would be naive to think that the fuss about electronic cigarettes was anything but a government panic about lost revenue. Keith Genvy, Forestfield. Well, here's the thing, it really isn't. If e-cigarettes or electronic cigarettes, if the government wanted to, they could quite easily make them legal, regulate them like any other tobacco product, and tax them exactly the same. And there would be no loss of revenue. Unless what you're talking about is a decrease in smoking rates, which would mean that there's a decrease in taxation of smoking, decrease in sales and therefore decrease in taxation. But any reasonable government realises that smoking is actually a net negative on the budget. So for every dollar you pull in taxes on tobacco products, you're spending out more than $1 in terms of health-related outcome spending for people who've got health problems caused by smoking. Most reasonable government, every Australian government wants to reduce smoking rates. And so this is a stupid argument. There's no reason that the government would be worried. What the big debate is over electronic cigarettes is simply about whether harm reduction is an effective strategy for tobacco use. And what I mean by that? Well, harm reduction is simply a strategy that says that there is some proportion of people who will continue to use a particular drug, say, almost regardless of what you do. So that there are essentially always going to be pot smokers, there will always be drinkers, there will always be heroin users. There may be a tiny percentage and we want to drive it down to the smallest amount possible. But we also, harm reduction acknowledges that there will almost always be these people and that those people should be encouraged to use their drug that they're using in the safest possible way, or the way that causes the least harm to themselves and other people. So if somebody is going to use heroin and all of your efforts to stop them haven't worked, you probably want them to use clean needles. Why? So that they don't transmit infections, and that reduces the health burden. You probably want to dispose of their needles safely so that small children don't get stuck by them. And this is well accepted within the policy area. Everybody knows it works, but it's a bit controversial in the general public because the general public see it as condoning, which it really isn't. And so the debate about e-cigarettes is whether allowing people to sell openly e-cigarettes, whether that is going to allow smokers who can't quit or won't quit to use cigarettes more safely, or whether it would encourage people who otherwise would have quit to not do so, or people who wouldn't use cigarettes to start using e-cigarettes. And that's what the debate is. And I'm not sure what the evidence is, but it's certainly nothing about revenue. Nobody is honestly cares about revenue because every government recognises they could just regulate it and make the same money they always have. Keeping left can end tailgating woe, 21st of June 2014. The tailgating problem is being caused by motorists failing to keep left. Roadmarks can cut crashes, 19th of June. I believe that elsewhere, the eastern states and internationally, motorists do not travel in the right-hand lane unless passing. I have lost count of the number of times I've been stuck behind two vehicles travelling side by side 5 kilometres below the posted speed limit, apparently oblivious to the mounting traffic behind them. Martin Bruce, Caversham. Well, I'm not sure whether it's universally held that elsewhere people don't go in the right hand, or I guess internationally it could be the left hand, in the overtaking lane, as it were, or the fast lane, unless they're overtaking. I suspect that is something we like to think that we're terrible at, that we probably are worse than other areas, but probably this is not a universally held thing elsewhere. But more importantly, tailgating is a problem in itself, and to say that tailgating is caused by people sitting, two abreast, travelling below the speed limit so that traffic banks up and traffic is somehow forced to tailgate, misses the point that actually your driving behaviour is your responsibility. If the person who's driving in front of you is driving poorly, you are not forced into tailgating them. It's not they did not cause you to tailgate, you chose to. But the broader take home that yes, if lots of people were driving like that, I could see that could be one factor in causing people to tailgate, I guess. And it should be something rude. But here's the other thing. If you are stuck behind somebody who's travelling 5 kilometres below the speed limit, now, to be a 2-lane road, we're almost certainly talking about something that has a speed limit of at least 60 k's. That means that somebody who's driving at 5 kilometres below the speed limit is at about 55 k's an hour. That is 1/12 of the maximum speed less, right? Which, when you think about it, means that even if you travelled your whole journey stuck behind this one person, instead of travelling at the speed limit, right? On average, we'd be looking at a 1/12 increase in the amount of time that you took to get there. What's 1/12? Well, that's about 5 minutes in an hour. So that means that if you were going to drive for an hour, if your entire commute, say your hour-long commute, would have otherwise been at 60 k's, but you were stuck behind this person doing 55, it's going to take you an hour and 5 minutes. Now, if you can't spare an extra 5 minutes out of your hour commute, right, you've got bigger problems. And if overwhelmingly, I mean, I know how annoying it is. I find it intensely frustrating to be stuck behind people who aren't driving at the speed limit, who are, blocking traffic. And I accept that. But I don't see this as a reason for me to drive poorly, I also recognise that they don't actually slow me down very much. They seem to, and certainly it feels like they do, but in reality they aren't actually that big a deal. And I really doubt that tailgating is caused by that. I would suspect that they have issues like that in other places that don't have massive tailgating issues. And the other thing is, actually, tailgating is not such a big deal in Perth. It's actually not a particularly common thing. People do have, I guess it depends on what you mean by tailgating, but I mean, we don't follow at a safe distance, but I suspect that that's true everywhere you drive. And I rarely experience people sitting right behind me, except for those small number of drivers who are just bad drivers in general, very aggressive drivers. And there, the tailgating isn't the issue. The issue is their aggressive and bad driving. Last one for this week. The day is supreme, 24th of June 2014. The time-honoured practice of no games on Good Friday should be respected. Of all days, it is the most sacrosanct, and is not for the AFL or any other authority to challenge its supremacy. Alan Mitter, Langford. So what he's talking about here is that recently the Australian Football League, AFL, have decided to start staging games on Good Friday. So up until now, games have not traditionally been played on Good Friday. Good Friday has been seen as being in keeping with Christian faith, has been seen as sacred and not to have sporting events. The new incoming president of the AFL has decided that it makes sense to play games on public holidays because that's when people attend and people actually like to watch games and go along to games on public holidays, and so it makes sense. And essentially he's recognising that we have a very secular country, that even people who are religious in Australia generally don't care too much about keeping the Sabbath holy. We tend to, Australians being Australians, like to watch and sport on our days off, and public holidays are always a popular day, whether it's a religious or non-religious public holiday. Of course, this has led to outrage from those people who are committed Christians who think that this should be a holy day that should be reserved for, not for sport. And the stupid thing about it is they've made no decent argument. The best they can mount is the argument that somehow Australia is a Christian country, and therefore our country as a whole should respect Christian holy days, and so to play sport on it is somehow, against that religion. The problem with that is that we aren't a Christian country. We are still majority Christian compared to other religions, and I think a little over half of the population are Christian. But as I say, the vast majority of those people don't care about playing football on a Good Friday. And so we're not Christian in the sense that we believe that our religion should impose itself on public life. Most Christians see religion as a personal thing, as something that guides their own behaviour. And so many of those people may well prefer to go to church on a Good Friday, and then go watch the football afterwards. Many of those people may well see that as guiding their beliefs, but they don't see that it necessarily has to impose itself on anybody else. And so that argument fails at the very first hurdle. And the idea that these letter writers have, that somehow their sacred, the sacred days, or what is sacred to Christianity should be sacred to a society as a whole, is one that's been false since the beginning of Australia. Australia was never exclusively Christian. It was never founded on the idea of exclusive Christianity or on a government of Christian ideals. We don't have a constitution like the US that explicitly states that there's a separation of church and state, but there has been a broad consensus that essentially the wishes of the majority should be respected, but the interests of the minority should also be represented, and therefore that Australia has never had a particularly strong stance on enforcing religion on its citizens. In fact, it's never had that position. In fact, quite the opposite. There's been a long tradition in Australia of allowing people, pretty much free rein to have their own religions, but not have that particularly imposed. And so this is just a stupid argument. And it's a stupid argument for another reason, because it's just fucking sport, for God's sake. I mean, that's all it is. It's a football match. If people want to go and watch football, that hardly hardly causes you to not be able to worship your God in whichever way you perceive fit. I mean, the fact that we're all going to hell according to you, really isn't an argument against us being able to do what we want. So I say get over it. Anyway, that's it for this week. It's always nice to have a little bit of a rant. Join me next week when I'll find out what's happening in the West. See you later.